Good evening. Male Survivor welcomes all our attendees in the US and around the globe for tonight's webinar with Dan Murphy and Chuck Christian. Thank you for your attendance. My name is Tim Kearns. I'm on the board of directors of Male Survivor, and I'm going to turn it right over to my colleague, also on the board, Ken Stockton, who's going to give an introduction to today's program.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. I'm very excited to be involved tonight, and I think we have a very large audience. We have some key issues to discuss with some very interesting and capable people. One is Dan Murphy. He's the co-author with John Barr of Start by Believing, Larry Nassar's Crimes, the Institutions That Enabled Him, and the Brave Women Who Stopped a Monster. Joining him as another guest of Male Survivor is Chuck Christian. Chuck Christian is a survivor. He's one of thousands of victims of really institutional enabling at the University of Michigan. He was abused by now deceased team doctor, Robert Anderson. And I have been connected with him as I've been connected with Dan, but I've been connected with Chuck because he has been involved in the camp-in protest outside the now fired university president's home on campus, where a lot of the victims of Dr. Anderson have been camped out since October. And the camper's still there. There are still some protesters there. And I think he'll have some very interesting insights about his experience as a survivor and as somebody who was victimized through institutional enabling. We also have Nathan Lasheen, who's a board member of Male Survivor. He's been with us for many decades. And we're glad to have him here. He's gonna really help us get chat posted questions and comments that we'll respond to. And then we have Lee Friedman, also a long-term advocate for male survivors. We're glad he could join us today. He's also a board member. You know, it's wonderful to have him. Murray, did I forget you? Murray, the president and in good standing of malesurvivor.org. And he just wrote a blog about institutions and sex abuse. And I have shared that blog. I think I shared it with you, Dan, and I think it's very consistent with some of your beliefs and feelings. So I'm gonna just start off with you, Dan. What inspired you to write this awesome book?
Well, yeah, thanks, Ken, and thanks for having me. I appreciate all you being here and having a chance to talk to everybody and hopefully learn a bit more tonight. But yeah, as you mentioned, I wrote the book along with a colleague of mine at ESPN named John Barr. And we had already been covering the Nassar case for probably going on 2 years before we decided to write the book. And it was after the sentencing hearings that some of you may remember that a lot of the world started paying attention to. And John and I decided that there was more of the story that a lot of people had not seen or heard. And I think a lot of that was focused on, we were blown away by the level of determination and persistence and innovation and skill and smarts that it took to have just this one moment of justice, even though it was, you know, all of them are too far and few between and too fleeting in many senses. But I think we wanted to try to drive home the point that it's incredibly hard to reach a moment like that. I think when a lot of people saw that case, they probably thought it was somewhat inevitable that Larry Nassar was going to end up behind bars for the rest of his life. But in fact, that wasn't the case. And it was only the incredibly hard work of a lot of people and the bravery of a lot of survivors that put him there. And so that's the story we really wanted to tell. And it's why I enjoy getting an opportunity to talk to groups like this, because I think the work that you all do and the courage that you all show is often very unacknowledged, and it can be thankless and incredibly tiring work. And as someone who's who hasn't been through those some experiences and certainly hasn't been in the daily trenches of the fight as often as many of you, I'm sure, have. It was a real privilege to get to see that hard work really pay off in a way for some of these women, and a great reminder that as thankless as the work is sometimes, it is definitely worth it when it comes together.
So what were some of the key takeaways for you in doing this extensive research on the Nassar case?
Sure, there was a lot to learn. I came to this from a sports background of reporting, and really, so I work as an investigative reporter at ESPN. So we cover issues that happen off the court, when the sports world intersects with bigger issues in society. But I was fairly new to covering sexual abuse when I started covering the Nassar case, and have since covered several other sort of high profile and lower profile cases of sex abuse that have emerged in the world of sports. But one of the things that came to light in this one, and I think is a little bit more of an optimistic takeaway in some sense, is that we spent a lot of time looking at the enablers, the systems that allowed abusers to get away with what they got away with for so long. Certainly that was the case in the Larry Nassar case, and as Chuck will be able to say way better than I will, was the case at the University of Michigan with Robert Anderson too. And I think one of the things that I learned as we sort of documented and went through all of the missed opportunities to stop someone like this is that more often than not, this isn't a universal thing, and it's certainly not making any excuses for these people. What they did was wrong, and they deserve to serve consequences for it. But more often than not, the fault wasn't so much pure evil with a lot of these people who missed these opportunities, but it was not understanding what they were looking at and not understanding the implications of standing by and not helping somebody to the degree that they could. And the reason I say that that's somewhat optimistic is I think the fight to get better at rooting out the abusers and the people who will willfully turn a blind eye knowing what they're looking at is more about teaching everybody else. And it's more about fighting ignorance than it is in fighting evil. And certainly there were people that I think we discovered that had an idea of what was going on and still chose to look the other way for any number of reasons. But more often than not, there were plenty of opportunities, especially in the Nassar case, to stop him years or decades sooner that people missed, where, I think had they really understood what they were missing, they would have done something better or different.
So, Dan, last week we had a little chat about the notion that the risk of sort of not continuing to focus on this issue. In other words, the villain's in jail now. Can you sort of revisit that for the people here?
Yeah, absolutely. That's another thing that sticks with me as I cover more and more of these cases, is that I think naturally, as someone who tells stories for a living and as people who consume stories as our main way of really understanding the world around us, when we see something that's unthinkably evil and hard to wrap our heads around, it's easier and convenient and natural to find a villain in that story. And that's the way we kind of share these bits of information. And while that I think can be useful in a lot of ways, I think it can also lead people astray or lead us astray from finding the solution to these problems sometimes when you focus strictly on the villain and decide if we get rid of this one person, we've solved the problem, or even if we get rid of the small circle of people that enabled him or her, we've solved the problem. And I think more and more as I learn about abuse, it's not necessarily one person or one small group of people that are the biggest obstacle to rooting out abuse and systemic abuse. It's understanding the lapses in the silos and the places in between all of those people where things get lost and confused. And it's really been something I spent a lot of time thinking about in the past year or two. And I don't know that I have a great answer for it at this point, of how to tell these stories in a way that helps people understand the systems that lead to abuse and the ways we can try to work among people who want to fix the problem to get stronger and better at it, as opposed to just finding the one head to put on a spike outside of the village gates, which is, something that's necessary at times. That, absolutely you need that outrage to drive the initial, interest in changing and doing better. But once you get there, finding the ways to work within the system to fix problems, I think is, it's an interesting challenge as somebody, who comes at this from a storytelling perspective.
Right. And, that's an interesting view, because one of the things that's really impressed me with the protest at the University of Michigan is the fact that they're protesting endemic sex abuse on campus that not only relates to what Dr. Anderson did, but what has been going on for decades with employees being abused, students being abused. And so, Chuck, do you want to pick up on that notion of, the theme of the protest and, why this campaign has happened?
Sure. All right. Thanks for having me, guys. This is so cool. And Ken's my friend.
Well, I could tell you some stories about this guy.
Yeah, but initially when we first went, this is what happened. John Vaughn and I have been working, doing different things, trying to get the attention of the university. And then one Friday, John said to me, he said, Chuck, I'm going to start a protest in front of the president's house. And I said to him, I said, John, well, when are you going to start? He's like, tonight. I said, John, on Friday night, did you check the weather? He said, no, I didn't check the weather. I said, it's supposed to rain like crazy tonight. And John said, Chuck, I don't care. I practiced in the rain. I played in the rain. I made a lot of money from Michigan in the rain. I can protest in the rain. Yeah. And then he began the protest.
And Chuck, we're showing now our attendees a photo of John in front of the president's house.
Oh yeah, that's our fearless leader right there.
Yeah, and John, as Chuck, played football for U of M, and John went on to play in the NFL for 4 seasons.
Yeah, he played for the Patriots.
Played for the Patriots up in your area.
Yeah.
But at any rate, so he did practice in the rain, and he's a pretty resilient man, I think.
Oh yeah.
As are you, Chuck.
So what happened was, after he said that he was going to start it anyway, I'm like, oh shoot. And what are you going to use? And he showed me this little chair and this little micro tent that you use at a soccer game, soccer moms use at the game. And it just covers the chair only. That's it. So, and it was so small and he could barely fit inside of it. And I'm like, oh no, he can't do this for any length of time. So I said, okay, John, I'm coming down. He's like, you coming, Chuck? I said, yeah, I'm coming. I'll be there on Wednesday morning. And he won't admit it, but he started crying. And because he knew he had some backup coming. So I brought like 3 tents with me because I'm a camper. So I brought 3 tents with me and sleeping bags and air mattresses and things like that. And then I got there early on Wednesday morning, and he said, and then I set the tents up in like 30 seconds, and he was amazed. And he said, he's like, I'm finally going to get a chance to sleep horizontally. I said, yeah. And then that's when it all began. And initially we were trying to inform the students that are there now about what happened to us as players, because I played for Michigan from 1977 through the 1981 Rose Bowl. That was the first time Bo won the Rose Bowl. So I was on that team, and I was so I was, See, another thing too is I had cancer, so sometimes the chemotherapy wipes my brain out real quick, and I start buffering. So, so it happens sometimes, but it doesn't bother me. But anyway, but then we began to talk with the students that were there, because initially we were there to tell our story to the students, and then they turned around and began to tell us their stories. And we were shocked that so many students have been sexually assaulted on campus before they got to campus. And it was just mind blowing. It was male and female. One male student told us, he said that his boss at work is always trying to hit on him. And he tried to press charges, but nobody listened to him. He tried to, go through the right channels, but nobody listened to him. And he was so frustrated. One girl told the story of being tied down and raped for 2 days. And she tried to get, things done about that, but the university turned a blind eye to that. And there was just time. And then some students told us that, they spent more time worrying about the next time they're going to get raped than they do thinking about their major.
Yeah. So Dan, you were calling the Nassar people who came forward brave. Do you look at Chuck and John and Tad and others that are part of the class in the lawsuit, the resolved lawsuit versus the University of Michigan, courageous and brave?
Oh yeah, of course, absolutely. And I first met Chuck or talked with Chuck almost 2 years ago when he was, going through his cancer treatments. And when we talked, we weren't sure that Chuck was going to be around to see when our story was published, let alone around almost 2 years later to be here tonight, which is fantastic. And we talked for a long time about what it takes to come forward and the courage that takes. And I don't think I've ever had a conversation with a survivor without feeling blown away by the sacrifice that they make to do that. One of the early things you hear, especially in the sports world, when you report on these things, is, oh, they're just after money or some sort of perverse fame or something like that to come forward and accuse an athlete or a university, the athletic department or something like that of this kind of wrongdoing. But after talking to enough people and understanding the sacrifice it takes to come forward and share a story, the re-traumatization it takes, how it changes your life, how it sticks with you forever, I can't ever imagine anybody going through that without anything but a selfless devotion to wanting to change for the next generation of people. And that certainly was the case with Chuck and John and looking for some kind of accountability. So I'll just share one more quick story. And this is about the Nassar case. There was an interview we were doing when we were doing the book. And I remember sitting in a coffee shop across from this woman, and she was telling me, bits about her story. And I asked her sort of about the long-term effects of the trauma that she went through. And she explained to me that every time that she talked to anybody about this story, and this is years into it, and she'd been, very public in sharing her story. But anytime she did that, whether it was a therapist or a reporter or a judge or a lawyer, that night she'd have horrible nightmares of being chased around by her abuser. And as I'm sitting there in the booth at this coffee shop talking to her, it's dawning on me that A, she's going to have those nightmares tonight because of me. And B, she agreed to sit down and talk to me, even though she knew that was going to be the case ahead of time. And it was a hard moment for me to get through without breaking down in the middle of a coffee shop, realizing the sacrifice and the courage it takes to come forward. So I can't speak highly enough about everybody who comes forward to share their stories in that way.
Right. Now Murray, I guess within the past week or so, you wrote the blog and you used the theme social collaboration to sort of identify this institutional complicity. Yeah. So you have some reactions to Dan Murphy's book and some of his insights and how they might match up to the whole social collaboration.
Well, I might be a little more pessimistic in that I think part of the problem is that my own experience working in a state hospital under New York State's Office of Mental Health is that I find that institutions, that whatever their stated publicly stated mission is, for example, taking care of the chronically mentally ill, the real mission for most institutions is to perpetuate itself. And I say that because I think that's part of the problem, that all the institutions that we know of, whether it's Michigan State or Penn State or the Catholic Church, the Boy Scouts, these are big institutions, of course, and they've all suffered from the same problem, which is that they harbor perpetrators. And part of the problem is that perpetrators look to institutions where their prey is going to be available. And so that's part of the problem. And the other part is that institutions don't want to reveal that they have these problems internally because it's bad for their reputation and their funding and so forth. And so they have ways of because there's so many people in the institution, things get diffused and yes, there are certain individuals who are probably more cognizant of what's actually going on and really turned a blind eye. But I think the institution itself promotes that as well. So I think it's a big problem. I don't know how to deal with it, except that the more transparent one can be, the better it is for everyone. But I think the problem is that institutions find it very hard to provide that. Look what in Dan's book, how Michigan State and all the institutions that Larry Nassar was working on were variously complicit in, even when they knew what was going on, they tried everything to keep it from coming forward. And so I think the bravery of the prosecutors, who really wanted the people, every victim or survivor, to give their own testimony, their own statement, impact statement at the hearing, at the sentencing, I think is part of the reason that makes institutions more likely to be more careful and more, hopefully, not let things like Larry Nassar go on to have so many hundreds of victims. But all the institutions that we know of that have perpetrators in them have many that are never revealed publicly, but are there. Right. So, I don't know what the answer is, but it worries me.
Yeah. So what's interesting to me is that I'm very interested in the cultural and social elements that allow this to happen. And I also think that, and I think telling is compelling. I think when we can tell our stories, and I know Chuck and your fellow victims at University of Michigan you want to tell your stories. And I think your objective has been to call attention to this as an issue and to advocate for policy, cultural, legal change to better protect people going forward so they're not sexually abused. Now, Lee, I'm going to get you engaged a little bit here because we had a little talk.
Hey, Ken, I want to do a poll before we get on to Lee. I want to hear from Lee, and I want to thank Dan and Christian and Chuck Christian for being part of our program tonight. You're listening to a webinar of recovery with male survivor, and I want to pull up our first poll of the evening so that our guests can get a sense of the different members of our attendees this evening. So on your screen, you can, this is an anonymous answered poll. You can select more than one choice. What roles do you identify with? And I'll leave that up for a few seconds. For our attendees, at the bottom of your screen, you have a control panel, and you can see the polls, the chat, the Q&A. While that's answering, also, I see that there's 3 Q&A questions in there. We're going to get to those. We want to let our attendees have a voice in the conversation.
Okay.
And here we go. I'm going to end the poll here now. And here are the results. Abuse survivors, 60% of our attendees tonight, followed by therapists and treating professionals, 23%, nonprofit organizations, 17%, the other category, 17%. For anybody that selected the other category, could you mention in chat what other meant for you, please? And we also had 15% partners and family members of survivors, and 2% from media and journalist field. Okay. So we have a couple more polls for our attendees tonight. Please continue to use the chat feature to talk amongst yourselves, and the Q&A for letting us have questions for the attendees, which we will be getting to.
Okay.
Go ahead, Ken, and hello,
Okay.
Lee.
Okay, so Lee, you and I spoke a couple days ago, and you had an opportunity to look over Dan and John's book, and it was triggering for you. That was one issue for you, but it was so triggering. No, I won't get into that story, but he got, but Lee had an interesting perspective on the Nassar victims that, and it was clear, I mean, they were, you know, physically, emotionally, and sexually abused, you know, and do you want to talk about that? You were talking about the commodity issue of these girls.
Yeah, I think the thing that, by the way, my name is Lee Friedman. I'm on the Male Survivor Board, and I wanted to thank our guests for being here too. One of the things that really impressed me in reading the book is how these gymnasts, the girls, were really treated as commodities by everybody, even by their parents, you know, by the coaches. You know, I have seen, you know, reading this, animals that have been treated better than these girls under the care of their coaches and counselors at the camps that they attended. And it seems to be a continuous thing where they're treated as commodities by these people who became the enablers for Larry Nassar, who treated them as his own commodity. And I'd be interested to hear Mr. Murphy's perspective on that as well.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. And yeah, I think was left with the same impression while reporting the book, and that one of the things that was very clear to us is that the culture of coaching in gymnastics that developed over the course of 20 or 30 years leading up to Nassar's arrival in the sport was one that was incredibly harsh and abusive in its own right in many ways, you know, physically and emotionally. And Nassar preyed on that. He weaponized that, and that often he was the only friendly face in the gym. And you know, I see there's a question in the Q&A, and this kind of ties into it too, about the grooming process, where when these girls weren't allowed to eat more than a few hundred calories a day, he was the one who would sneak them a Snickers bar. When these girls were told that they were worthless and they'd never amount to anything, and that they were, you know, wasting everybody's time for being there, he's the one who they would go cry on his shoulder, and he would build them back up. And so he built this incredible, bank of trust among a lot of these young girls, so that many of them, even after understanding, what it was he was doing them, had a really hard time coming to grips with the idea that this man had sexually abused them. And it took them years, if not decades, to come to grips with some of that. And that's absolutely, I think, what he preyed on was that culture, and the fact that these girls were so beaten down and demoralized in many other ways. He found that he could sort of find a way to sneak in to earn their trust through that, and then, obviously exploit it in horrible ways.
Yeah, it really it really illustrates the many layers of enabling that happen, because this really, the abuse of the girls, by the non-sexual abuse of the girls by the people who were in charge of them, unwittingly enabled, Larry Nassar, as well as the turning of the heads, which is what I call it in my case. There were just, heads that people just would not look for, like what you said, not necessarily because they were mean people or they were bad people, but just because they just couldn't understand it, couldn't see it. And but this, it sort of begs the question: how do you solve this kind of a problem if there are with so many layers of enabling?
Right. It's complicated. My head was spinning after I read the book, and I told this to Dan. I said, man, this is as bad as climate change. There's so many variables that impact on this, that enable very proficient and almost professional serial predators to act in this way. And how do you start to get at that? Chuck, I had a question for you, and it's kind of a general question.
Mm-hmm.
Most of Anderson's victims were male,
mm-hmm.
and many of them were people of color.
Mm-hmm.
And also they were aspiring athletes who wanted desperately to play sports, in many cases football, for U of M, this major college powerhouse. And I think even though you were 17 or 18-year-olds coming to college and wanting to play football, you were in fact vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And do you want to comment on that a little bit?
Sure. When I got to Michigan, I did not know what to expect, because I was one of the first in my family to go to college, but I was definitely the first to play college sports. And so I didn't know what to expect. So when I got there, the first thing they told me was go see Anderson and get my physical. And when I went to see Anderson, he went through the regular normal stuff that I had done when I was in high school. And then he said, okay, now drop your pants and bend over. And I'm like, what's this about? Because I've never had this done before. So then I bent over, because, we've been taught that Michigan's leaders and best, and Michigan is the #1 in everything. And if he was asking me to do this, then there was a reason for me to do this. So I'm not going to question it. And plus, I didn't want to get in trouble with the coach, because if you get in trouble with the coach, you do not play at Michigan. So he put his finger up my butt, and I started screaming. And then he said, you feel pressure, right? I said, no, I feel pain. I know the difference between pain and pressure. And then when I got to the football practice, I was still troubled by what had happened. So I asked some upperclassmen, some seniors and juniors. I said, hey, Dr. Anderson put his finger in my behind. What's up with that? They said, oh, Chuck, get used to it. He's going to do that to you every year. And I'm like, oh, crap, I didn't know that. But I'm still thinking that it's a legitimate physical. So every year it happened. And I did not realize that I had been sexually violated until 2 years ago. I was in the hospital, And a friend of mine, I was in the hospital and I was in really bad pain. I could hardly walk. Well, I couldn't walk, but I was in so much pain. And my friend called me up and he said, Chuck, you remember those physicals Anderson gave us? I said, yeah. He's like, he was raping us, man. I said, what? So he put me in touch with my lawyer. And then through my lawyer, he put me in touch with Dan. And Dan was doing an article about the story. And it got so bad that I had to call Dan crying. Remember that, Dan? I called Dan crying. And I said, Dan, if you're going to do this article, you better do it within a week, because I cannot guarantee you that I'm going to be here next week. And he jumped right on it and started working, because, he was trying to get the article done. And then when the article was done and it went out, I got 40 phone calls from different players that I played with. Some I played with, some I didn't play with, but some of the guys just called me crying and sobbing like little boys. And it was so hard. And some of the guys were thinking about committing suicide because of what Anderson had done to them and how badly they felt about themselves. Yeah.
So, one of the differences, obviously, at Michigan as compared to with Larry Nassar, is that the victims are largely males. And I believe that there's a certain amount of there's more understanding and compassion around females being abused. And there's more dismissiveness about males being abused. And also, and I think it's much more difficult for males to understand they've been abused, to acknowledge they've been abused, to talk about it. And also in terms of how this lawsuit played out, I think some of the ways it played out also related to that sense of dismissiveness,
exactly,
because males were victims.
Right.
Hey, Ken, I'd like to go to another poll, because it dovetails right into what you're saying.
Okay.
And that is about the ease with which concerns and allegations can be ignored or dismissed. And we have been talking about how concerns get dismissed because of lack of understanding, even, but without a judgment on it. So the question here is, in your opinion, this is for our attendees, which of the following factors contributes most to organizations when they enable sexual abuse in their ranks? Pick one of the choices. I'll leave this up for a couple seconds. The choices are lack of general awareness about how common sexual abuse is, limited media focus on sexual abuse within organizations, organizational focus on positive news only, protecting the brand, inadequate laws, policies, and procedures, and the final one, ease with which concerns or allegations can be ignored. There is another choice also. So if you select that, please chat us up about what you had intended to imply there with your choice. I know also we have some Q&A questions, which we have weaved in through the conversation in a way, and we'll get to more of those. All right.
Okay. So, Murray, do you have a sense of, we have the results here.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have an opinion about the dismissiveness toward males versus females?
Well, even up till now, part of the reason it's dismissed is that males, until they're generally in their 30s, at least for years it's been that, never say anything, never disclose, and often don't even recognize themselves that they were abused. And so it's different than females, who are much more likely to reveal but for different reasons. But also for men who've been abused, usually their perpetrator is a male. So there's a great deal of shame and fear of being labeled not only as homosexual, which for a lot of men would be shameful and untrue, but also that people take the position that if you've been abused, you are going to be or are already an abuser. So it has multiple reasons why men will not disclose. And the other side is that society has for years assumed that boys cannot be abused, and if they have some sort of sexual event, that it's sloughed off. It's part of being a male, that nothing can, neither sticks nor bones can break your bones. So no sexual abuse can hurt you, is basically what I was told when I was in college and in therapy. My psychiatrist totally dismissed my concern about abuse and focused much more on other things, including my relationship to my father, which had nothing really sexual in it. So much, but I mean, no abuse certainly. But so it's a complex problem for men. And I think part of the problem is that in that silence, it allows perpetrators to use that. And, the Nassar was, of course, not only gifted at creating this aura of being an advanced professional, but also, as Dan pointed out, he was able to groom his patients, as it were, to feel that they can trust him and like him and turn to him, even when he was abusing them. And this is true of boys who are groomed by their abuser into feeling that they were complicit. Boys can be sexually aroused even though they are not wanting to be, and because it's a physiological event. And so the abuser will say, "See, you're enjoying this," or you're having a sexual excitation, an erection, whatever. And so it's a very big problem for men and for institutions who don't want to see their stalwart football players as being, prey, as victims of anything. These guys are, supposedly hardy and very masculine, and therefore they're totally cannot be abused. And I guess a lot of the guys don't even believe they were abused. They just cannot face that.
Yeah. So at the camp-in, and I certainly haven't spent as much time there as Chuck or John or Tad DeLuca, but I've actually had former athletes come up to the camp-in and at that moment tell me that they only realized they were an abuse victim a day or two ago, and they wanted to come to the camp-in. And it's a tear-jerking experience. I mean, I've cried with any number of people at the site. Dan, I want to come back to you. I want to get a sense for what has been your perception of the reader reaction thus far to the book.
Generally positive. It's certainly not an international bestseller by any means. I don't think when you set out to cover this topic that you expect that that's going to be the case, and that certainly wasn't our goal. I think when John and I set out to do this, we wanted to make sure we sort of hit the notes that we said, and not treat this as one of the phrases we use with each other is, we don't want to make this the Lifetime movie version of this story. This isn't a fairy tale ending, even though there is a bit of justice at the end of it. Like, all of these women are still going to have trauma and difficulty to deal with for a long time. And we wanted to make sure that we were being true to the story. And we also wanted to make sure that we were being clear that what we were writing wasn't about us, that we were sharing stories that belonged to other people, and that we wanted to sort of empower other people through telling their stories. So in that sense, we heard back from the people that we cared most about, the people that gave us their time and their trust to tell their stories, and they were happy with the way it came out. We've heard from some folks that say that even folks that were either abused by Nassar or by other people, and said that, some of the patterns and the ways this laid out rang true to them, and felt like it was close to their experience too, which is wonderful feedback. Certainly there's been negative feedback too, people who thought we didn't take it the right way, or we were too negative about the school or the institution that they loved, but you're obviously going to find that anywhere. Overall, I'm very proud of it still, and I'm glad that some people will get something out of it by reading it.
Yeah.
Dan, the book can be found on Amazon and other popular booksellers. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, and thanks. I'm not here to try to sell any more books, certainly, but if people want to check them out. I think for a while too, it was RAINN has a bookstore, the RAINN, RAINN, the Abuse Network, and if you buy it through their bookstore, a portion of the proceeds go to RAINN's programming and raising a sexual assault awareness. So if you're interested in a copy, I'd suggest checking that alley out for looking for one.
And attendees can follow your excellent work and reporting on your Twitter account. Can you tell us what that is?
Twitter is Dan Murphy ESPN, and there's a mix of this kind of reporting, a few different other topics. We do a lot of college sports reporting too that gets mixed in there. But we will have some stories within the next couple of weeks, hopefully, on some that really dives into institutions and their the lengths they'll go to protect the brand, and try to go to those things. So hopefully some of that'll be out there soon.
I found
Dan, how would you define institutions? Is it a broad definition?
Yeah, I think so. In my world, it's typically universities and or sports teams or federations, right? So I've covered stories about schools. I've covered stories about places like USA Gymnastics or the U.S. Olympic Committee, or a professional sports team. We covered a couple of things about the Chicago Blackhawks, and certainly they're not the only ones who have had a case like this pop up. But any sort of corporate organization that is, as I think we've talked about here, that is really more concerned in a lot of ways with the financial ramifications of this and the reputational. That means, both in terms of their reputational hit and what that means to their finances, and the legal liability, which I think are two really big reasons why leaders of institutions often don't do what they should when presented with some evidence of abuse.
So we could say state governments that are backed by and supported by institutions. So it's like a secondary effect as well.
Sure.
Yeah. Chuck, how can we get a hold of you, Chuck? Are you out there?
Yes, I'm. You can email me. I can be. I'm on Twitter too, and I'm a Twitter newbie, so emails are fine. Mr. Chuck Christian at gmail.com.
Thank you, Chuck. Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, I was going to come back to this whole issue of people continuing to protect the institution or even the perpetrator. And actually, I just read a news story a couple of days ago about the University of Michigan case where Anderson's own family members say that this is untrue and he didn't do that. Did you see that, Chuck?
No, I didn't see that one. That's crazy. I heard about it, but I didn't see it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like, and Sandusky still has people who say he didn't do it. Bill Cosby, it's like, it's just, it's kind of insidious in some ways. I mean, the evidence is so clear cut in the Anderson case and in the Nassar case, and it just blows you away. It really, as a survivor, it really blows you away. And from my own perspective, this issue of the predators being proficient and almost professional in what they do, and their ability to groom families and potential victims, and even groom the institutions that they might be involved in. And I really do believe that this is endemic in in society and culturally. And I think telling the story like we're telling it tonight is crucial, because I think the more public awareness there is, the more transparency that Murray was talking about, I think we're beginning to seek a solution. And that's what I think is so wonderful about what the book is about, the Nassar book, as well as the University of Michigan protests, because you are trying to bring this story forward in a powerful, impactful way. And, you know, the amount of media coverage that you guys have generated at the University of Michigan, it's powerful. It's powerful and it's compelling. And I hope against hope that people pay attention. And I think it's difficult. I mean, I had this discussion with Dan that there's been sort of a death of local journalism, that people have limited attention spans. You know, it's really tough to get people on board to understand this. But I really value what you've done, Dan, and I really value, Chuck, what you and your folks have done at University of Michigan.
Thank you.
There's a couple of Q&A questions regarding understanding and recognizing patterns. If we can step in earlier, if we can understand these patterns. Thank you for the questions. And so just to make sure that we didn't miss this about grooming, since it is a very common experience, is what did you discover about the grooming process regarding the victims? Nassar could not do it all alone. It was not in the media. And what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, no, I think he's certainly, so the grooming process, you know, I think he for a long time worked on perfecting that and learning how to earn the trust of not only the young girls he abused, but also everyone around them in some ways. You know, we talked to a lot of parents who felt like they were groomed to trust him and to turn a blind eye to things, and felt like in a way that he had very much groomed entire families to turn over their young, you know, children to him. We talked about the way that some of the way that other adults around those girls acted sort of added to that process in some ways. I think all of those are incredibly important factors in recognizing that, I think early on, you know, in the late 90s, when the first complaints came out about him, there was probably still a bit of perception that the abuser was the sketchy guy in the windowless van that was in the park at night. And I think we are in a better place now as a society of recognizing that most abuse happens by somebody who's close to the victim, and most abuse happens by somebody in a position of trust in some way. I think obviously there's more of that probably needs to be learned and understood, but I'm hopeful that understanding that better will help people step in sooner and maybe be more likely to follow up on something that seems fishy or seems problematic, or even, you know, more on the nose. A young person complains about an adult in their life, and someone's more likely not to ignore that. I hope that's the case. I don't know if it's there or not yet, but that certainly was a problem that helped Nassar in his early years of abusing girls.
Yeah. Can I make a little comment? I really appreciate that, and this conversation on grooming, I think it is so important as male survivors. And Ken had brought this up before my computer decided to crash, and I had to jump back in, and I apologize for that. But for male survivors, as a male survivor, reading what these girls went through, reading the grooming process that they went through, is, having been a male, would not have immunized you at all from any of this. There's a universality to this process that pertains to boys and to girls, both. And that's why I think that this book is so essential for any survivor of sexual abuse.
Yeah, thanks. I think we see that in other cases. A couple of colleagues of mine had a story a year or two ago about a track coach named Conrad Manwaring who groomed male athletes for decades, you know, from coast to coast, as he was a track coach. training them. And it was a very similar type of impact that he had on men. And I think, Chuck could probably speak to this too, but I think Dr. Anderson in his own way also groomed a lot of his victims by convincing them that he was going to help them in some way, make a team, or some of the other things he's been accused of doing, like some of the studies that he had that he was, allegedly working on to try to find a better way for athletes to, Chuck, you can probably speak to this a little better. I can, but certainly there was grooming involved in its own way in that case too.
Right, because we were taught to trust Anderson, and so when he began to tell the players that he wanted to get sperm samples from them so that he could track their sperm count over the 4 years they were at Michigan, then guys were like, some guys like, I don't know, but well, I guess maybe it's for a good reason. So then they would, give into it. And then he would have the guys to masturbate. And then when they got close, he's like, I'll handle it from here. And he'd finish them off because he said that he needed to finish the guys off because he had experience in collecting the sperm. So he knew exactly what needed to be done. And even for the guys that happened to, a lot of them never reported it because, they knew that if they bucked the system or upset Anderson, that he would call Bo. And if he called Bo, then you don't practice. And it's just a whole lot of stuff that goes on. But yeah, so he had so much control because he was the doctor that Bo had selected. And in Bo's eyes, it was as if he could do no wrong, but he did all wrong. And see, some people say, well, Bo didn't know. He didn't know. It's like, wait a minute. You're telling me that this man raped maybe 300 guys a year for 37 years and Bo didn't know and nobody else knew? That's crazy. Even a broken clock is right twice a day. And that's, but they want to give Bo a pass because they love Bo. And I've had a lot of people get really upset with me because I said Bo knew. And then a lot of people started deleting me from their Facebook accounts.
Well, the awful thing about perpetrators is probably there are psychopaths, which means that they are out to do whatever they want to do, but they also are very charismatic. They know how to charm, and because they can read people, that's how they exist. They have to read people in order to get control over them, and so they learn how to manipulate, how to groom, and they believe what they're doing is fine because it's all about gratifying their own desire and their own need and their own agenda. And they can charm the people that are looking on and like Bo and maybe know, but they have a way of making him sort of not believe in what he actually knows. They're incredibly skillful, and the more they're able to get away with it, obviously, the better they are at that skill. And Nassar was a supreme example. And these guys like Nassar, they get married, they have children. You think that where is somebody who basically doesn't really have empathy is able to even create a family and have family relationships that the family members don't even realize that they're being groomed in order to sustain his own image.
Right.
It's like Dennis Rader, the killer in Kansas, who was married, had several kids, was the president of his church congregation, et cetera, and worked for the city. And yet he was going around murdering people in the most horrible, brutal way. And yet he obviously was able to groom everyone around him, because that's what psychopaths are very good at. So it's a very seriously dangerous person out there. And it's the need to be aware of the signs is really what all institutions have to figure out how to do. because otherwise they're going to have other predators creeping in and making their way.
I had a comment. So, I think one of the real valuable elements of telling and being connected to other survivors, which happened with many of the Nassar survivors, they came together, and also many of the survivors of Dr. Anderson at U of M, that, being a sex abuse survivor, a male sex abuse survivor, is often a lonely road, being an abuse survivor. And when you find connection with other survivors, and that's what happened with you, Chuck, that you had all these phone calls, and that's what happened with the Nassar people. And I think one of the real values for Male Survivor is that we actually have a platform for male survivors and those around them, their partners, to have that connection, anonymously, even if they choose to, through our support forum. And that includes a discussion forum where people can pose questions like, this happened to me, here's what's going on with my family, I'm angry all the time. And we have hundreds of thousands of posts in that discussion forum. And then we have a moderated 24/7, we have chat rooms that are moderated. And I know a lot of, I've communicated with a lot of male survivors, and this has been hugely healing and restorative and helpful for male survivors to be connected to other survivors and not be alone in the world with all these issues. So that gives us a chance to talk about. Nathan, are we going to do something our after event post?
Yes. So what we're going to be offering is just to kind of continue on this great conversation we're all having in this discussion. We'll be hosting in the Male Survivor chat room. So I'll be going over there shortly after the end of this and be in there for the next half hour to kind of continue on the conversation and the discussion. We've had a lot of great questions been asked. I've had a lot of people direct message me questions. So I know we haven't had time to answer everything on this webinar. So please join me over there. If you go to the Male Survivor, you'll have to sign up for a free account. And you just go straight to the forums and click on register new account, and I will get you approved and see you in chat shortly.
Yeah. And so what Nathan's just talking about, when this webinar concludes, attendees will be referred to a link for completing a very brief post-webinar survey to get your feedback on tonight's program. And after you complete that, you'll be automatically referred to the Male Survivor Forum, and you can take it up from that point on. Just wanted to give the opportunity as we wrap up here now to our panelists to take a few moments to have a final word. Why don't we start off with Chuck?
All right. All right. I just, I'm so excited about this because I know for me, once I found John Vaughn and Tad DeLuca and Kenny and the rest of the crew at the University of Michigan, it made all the difference in the world, because you can be authentic with another survivor and you can understand each other much better. And it's just amazing for me. I just met John and Tad 3-4 months ago. Now they're my best friends. And I don't know if you guys know, but we were on Dr. Phil. We were on Dr. Phil yesterday and today. So, and it was a powerful show. And we told our story with Dr. Phil, and he's going to be working with us with some projects. And you can actually go on demand and look up the Dr. Phil shows, and it would be season 20, episode 92 and 93, but they were absolutely phenomenal. And so if you can get a chance to see that, that would be absolutely great.
Murray, then Lee.
He's muted.
Okay. Go ahead, Lee.
Murray, you're muted. You're muted. There you go.
Sorry, I think I said what I wanted to say and had to say, so I'm passing it to Lee.
Well, actually, it's interesting because I was going to refer back to what you said when you were talking about psychopaths and sociopaths and abusers, and I certainly got that impression from reading Mr. Murphy's book on Larry Nassar, and how much like an out of control freight train he was. He just seemed to have absolutely no control. And I think that the two things that I really take with me from this conversation are, number one, what you said, which basically describes the abuser as a constant in an equation. Really, the variables are the people who are really capable of doing something about it. People who can step in and not enable this, but actually help to stop it. And I really appreciate what Dan Murray's book, that it really addressed that. It didn't say, hey, this guy is so evil, this guy is so terrible. He really focused on the people around who can do something. And that really, I think is a valuable lesson. It also speaks about grooming and about the process, and about how, as a male person, a male individual can put himself in the position of these girls and realize that he would have been no better off, in dealing with this, and it really sort of puts to rest for me this notion that men should be strong enough to not, find themselves in a similar situation. So I really appreciate the guests that we've had today. And thank you.
And Nathan, have anything to wrap up?
I think the biggest thing is understanding that you are not alone.
Mm-hmm.
That is one of the most powerful things that has changed so many men's lives, knowing you are not alone. You can come into the light, you can share, and you will be believed. Join us.
Thank you, Nathan. And I just wanted to add my thanks to all our panelists and Dan and Chuck for being here tonight, and to our attendees. Remember to take care of yourself. If you need support, you can join us in the Male Survivor Forum in the chat at any time. And also, since it wasn't mentioned, I also wanted to say that our forum has about a dozen, if not more, sub-forums, including a friends and family forum, where loved ones of survivors can have a space to voice themselves in and meet with and interact with other friends and family and loved ones. So that's important also to mention. And with that, I just want to turn it back over to Ken, who organized this program this evening, and to Dan.
Okay, well, tonight I feel like I've been surrounded by friends and advocates. It's been very fulfilling for me. And I have two things that I always think about. I believe that every predator needs enablers, number one. And then I also think that telling is compelling. Mm-hmm. And that's why I so much wanted to be involved in this webinar tonight, because I think Dan's book reflects the power of telling, and it reflects the whole issue of enabling. And I think the protest at the University of Michigan does the same. And I want to thank everybody for being involved, and it's great. And let's just keep trying to solve this problem. Let's keep telling, and let's try to bring some solutions to the fore. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much.
All right.
Yeah, I'll just quickly add, I just wanted to add my thanks too for having me and for the discussion. It was enlightening. You know, I'm not a survivor. I'm not somebody who's working on these problems in the daily trenches in the same way that a lot of you all are. So I very much consider myself still learning from all of this. And you know, if there's some type of outside perspective I can bring, and I'd reiterate from what I said earlier, is that all of this hard work is as thankless and unacknowledged as it probably often is, makes an incredible difference. You know, I've seen it change cultures. I've seen it change lives. It's certainly changed my life. I'm a profoundly different person than I was 5 years ago when I first started covering this stuff. So thank you, all of you, for all of the hard work you do and the way that you share each other's burdens, because as has been mentioned here, that's an incredibly powerful thing from what I've witnessed. So appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you, Dan. And on that, you've been listening to a webinar of recovery presented by Male Survivor. Thank you to all of our attendees, and we hope to see you in a few moments after you complete the feedback survey and join us in our chat. Good night, everybody.